This boy tried to drown his sister? Story time. So recently I went to this indoor water park, and yes, it is cold outside, but inside of the building was really warm, so it was okay. But inside of the building, they had these huge water slides, and 2 people could go down at the same time. So I'm waiting in line for this slide, right? And I was behind a younger boy and his little sister. They were going before me. But before you can go down, there's somebody who stands at the slide, and they have to tell you all of these safety rules, to be safe. So he's telling the boy and his sister all of the safety rules, and he's like, hey, number 1 rule, do not push anybody down the slide because they can drown. And I'm sitting there like, that's a bit serious. But as soon as he says this rule, the little boy looks at his sister and goes, and he bear hugs his sister and tosses her down the slide. And all you can hear is her screaming like the entire way down. So the instructor is freaking out, everybody in line is freaking out, and the little boy is just sitting there looking down the slide like, that's what she gets. Thank God when she came out of the other side, she was okay, but she did fracture her foot. At least she didn't drown. My brother shot me in the eye. Story time. When we were younger, my brother was always so mean to me. Like, he always made fun of me or made me do things I didn't really want to do. Anyways, during the summer when it got really hot, me and him would always have water gun fights. And on this particular day, I remember it being really hot, so my dad decided that he was going to surprise us with new water guns. They were really big too, like half my body size. But anyways, when he gave them to us, he told us to be really, really careful with them because they were kind of strong. And they were, because when my brother would hit me with it, I'd be like, ooh, ow. Okay, but that kind of hurted me though. So like I said, my brother was very mean, right? In the middle of our water gun fight, he pretended that his gun stopped working. So I'm like, what's wrong? We just got these. And he was like, I don't know, I think there's something stuck in my gun. Can you come look at it? So me being the big stupid dummy head that I am, I walk over to him, I'm like, let me see. And I stick my eye right into the gun hole. And he goes, do you see anything? And I'm like, no, I don't see anything at all. And then my brother goes, how about now? And he shoots it in my eye, and then my eye starts bleeding. She sliced her face? Story time. Y'all, this is why you do not mess with the quiet kids. In 11th grade, I used to be friends with this girl named Olivia. And Olivia was one of those people who were really shy, kind of to themselves, didn't really speak much, you know what I mean? And this other girl, who we're gonna name Nicole, used to bully Olivia to the point where Olivia was scared to come to school sometimes. And Olivia tried telling the teachers and even tried telling the parents, but no one did anything about it. So I was like, if no one's gonna help you out, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to fight that bitch, okay? And make sure you get her good. Let her know that you are not the one to be played with. So the next day, Olivia comes to school and she's like, when I see Nicole, it's going down. And I was like, okay, girl, do you. I'm proud of you. Well, she ends up running into Nicole shortly after that. And when she sees her, she pulls out a razor blade from her mouth and slices Nicole in the face. My best friend locked me in a car trunk. Story time. So when I was in middle school, I had this best friend who we're gonna name Ashley. And Ashley was pretty mean to me. She would borrow my stuff and never give it back, ask me for money and never pay me back, and she would also make fun of me in front of people to make herself seem better. But she never tried to harm me until this one day. I was at her house and she asked me to play hide and seek, so I was like, sure. But it was just the 2 of us, so I thought it was pretty weird. She then said, before we start, she wanted to show me some of her favorite hiding spots, so I was like, okay. Then she takes me outside to her mom's car and tells me that she likes to hide in the trunk. Then she asked me if I wanted to see what it was like in there, and I was like, sure, I guess. So she opens the front door to the car, pops the trunk, and I get inside and she closes it on top of me. Now I was fine until I realized she walked away and left me in the trunk to die. I was in there screaming for 2 hours, and the only reason I was let out is because her mom heard me screaming inside of the trunk when she had to go get groceries. My stepdad tried to kill us. Story time. Growing up, my mom was in a very toxic relationship with my stepdad. And it was so bad that they would argue every single day, and many nights my mom would be left crying. And she tried to hide it from me and my brother, but we knew what was going on. Well, this one time they got into an argument, it got super heated and it almost became physical. Me and my brother had to literally hold them back from each other. And their fight became so big that my mom had to call the police to get him removed from the house. And after that entire incident, the next day, he came back to the house to get all of his stuff, and then he just left. And we thought we would never have to see him again. Until about a week later. During the middle of the night, while we were all sleeping, he snuck into our house, put gasoline on everything, and set it on fire. And the only reason we got out of there is because the fire alarm started going off. Then my mom woke up, ran to our room, and we had to literally jump out the window. There was a demon sleeping in my bed. Story time. So growing up, me and my brother used to share a room. And not only did we share a room, but we shared a bed as well. I slept on the outside and he slept on the inside. So every time he would have to get up to go to the bathroom or something, he would have to climb over me. So one day he decided that he was going to sleep at his friend's house. So I was like, cool, whatever. I get the room to myself. Or so I thought. I go to bed, and then the next day, really early in the morning, I feel somebody crawl over me and get into the bed next to me. So I just figured that my brother had just came home early or something. So I say his name, but all he says back is, shh, close your eyes, go back to sleep, it's just me. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I went back to sleep because I was tired. So when I finally did get up, I look over and I see my brother, but he's like under the covers. So I'm like, good morning. And he responds with this groaning noise, like, So I was like, okay, whatever. I'm gonna go out and watch TV in the living room. While I'm watching TV, like 5 minutes later, my brother walks through the front door. So I was like, weren't you just in bed? He was like, no, I just got back from my friend's house. She ended up in a wheelchair. Story time. I used to go to school with this girl who we're gonna name Roxanne. Now, Roxanne was really pretty, but she was also really mean. She is what you would call a bully. Well, one of the people that she loved to pick on was a girl named Ashley. And Ashley happened to be in a wheelchair. Now, Roxanne would pick on her every day. She would talk about her being in a wheelchair. She would ask her rude things like, how did that happen to you? How do you not know how to walk? And just say some really rude things. Eventually, Ashley did tell the school, but the school never did anything about it. Fast forward a couple years after high school. I just happened to look them up because I was searching up people from my high school just to see like what everybody was up to. Ashley has a husband and kids, and guess what? She's walking now. She doesn't need her wheelchair. And as for Roxanne, she apparently got into some sort of accident because she's now in a wheelchair. Karma is so real.
Here's a story time of how me and my sisters almost got kidnapped. So my mom and her boyfriend were just going to go out and have a night to themselves, and I was home watching my two little sisters. At the time, I was 13, my two little sisters were 9 and 6. So around 6 p.m., my mom and her boyfriend leave. Me and my sisters just sit down and watch a movie, and then I get up to make them dinner. I get paranoid really easily, and while I was making them dinner, I look out the kitchen window, and I thought I seen somebody in the backyard. I text my mom and she gets on the cameras that are outside and she said nobody was out there. I continue making them dinner, we sit down and eat, and then we start watching another movie. Then we start hearing knocking. It wasn't coming from any of the doors, it was coming from the side of the house. I didn't want to bother my mom on her one night out, so I just took the kids and we went upstairs and watched a movie in my room. My 6-year-old sister at the time went to the bathroom and she came back in literal tears. She was literally crying so hard until I finally got her to stop and tell me what was wrong. She said as she was walking back from the bathroom, she seen somebody downstairs. I quietly locked my door and I put my sisters in the closet and I called my mom right away. I'm running out of time, like for part 2.
So at this point, she had been living at the lighthouse for like 6 months, and she was getting pretty creeped out because bizarre things started happening. She started noticing that some of her food was going missing, but she was the only person who lived in the lighthouse, obviously, and she was really specific about what food she bought when she went grocery shopping. She went to the grocery store at the beginning of each week, and for example, she would always buy 7 apples, 1 for each day of the week, and she was always really precise about that. But there were a few Sundays where she didn't have any apples left by the end of the week, which didn't make any sense because she always counted at the grocery store to make sure she had 7 apples, so she started getting more and more creeped out, but she didn't want to say anything because she had nowhere else to live. And then one night, she woke up in the middle of the night to something touching her feet at the end of her bed.
I have a 9-year-old daughter who I named after my late grandmother, Annabelle, and I'm currently pregnant. If I'm having a girl, I want to name her after my other grandmother, Rose. My sister got pregnant about 5 months before me and says she wants to name her baby Rose. I said our kids can share the name, but she says I already have Annabelle and could have named her Annabelle Rose, but passed up on the chance. So now I can't have Rose. I told her I'll look for something else, but reserve the right to use Rose if I want to. Then I fell in love with the name Rosalie. It honors my late grandmother, my boyfriend loves it, and it won't piss off my sister. A couple of weeks later, my sister gives birth and announces her daughter's name is Rosalie. I am beyond upset because now she's trying to snatch both names from me. My mom calls me to say she knew my sister was planning to do this and hopes I'm not upset because this means I can take the original name I wanted, which was Rose. But I told my mom I'm sticking with Rosalie. She said it's impractical because both Rosalies will have the same surname. My sister is a single mom and my boyfriend will be taking my last name. My sister then calls me to say I'm an inconsiderate prick and that I'm being petty. She can name her kid whatever she wants and I can't monopolize the name. I said true, so by that same logic,
I'm pretty sure my teacher ate my classroom pet. Story time. So I had this teacher named Mr. B, and he was always talking about the weird foods he liked to eat. For instance, live octopus, 1,000-year-old duck eggs, snails, and frog legs. But the thing is, we had a frog named Mr. Grumpy as a classroom pet. A frog, just like Mr. B said he liked to eat the legs of. But one day when we came back from lunch, Mr. Grumpy was missing. So of course we're all like, where's Mr. Grumpy? What happened to Mr. Grumpy? Mr. B, where's Mr. Grumpy? And Mr. B says, Mr. Grumpy passed away during lunch, and I buried him outside so you guys didn't have to see it. And most of us were mad because we were like, you buried Mr. Grumpy without us? Also, if I was a superhero, what do you guys think my superhero name would be with this look? So we finish out the rest of class, and then we go home, but then we come back the next day. And in the middle of class, my favorite teacher walks in. Shout out to you, Janice. Don't sue me, girl. So she walks in, and she goes up to Mr. B, and she says, how are those frog legs you had yesterday? Were they good?
Storytime part 2 on how my sister ended up accidentally dating my brother. So over the course of dating John for about 5 years, she picked up a lot of information about his life. Essentially, he said that he came back to his birth home to go to community college here after his dad passed away. In Germany. His dad never said anything about his mom, so he never knew name or any info. While this seemed kind of similar to our brother's story, she just wasn't thinking about it. It happened when she was so young that it just didn't really cross her mind. And my mom and her were not on speaking terms, so it's not like my mom could just recognize him. Anyways, since they were dating for so long, he ended up proposing to her. She was so excited and ended up bringing him over to our grandma's to spread the news. When they walked in, my grandma made the weirdest face. She asked what his name was and then broke down into tears when he said John. She was like, oh my God, that is your long-lost brother. And the only reason she knew it is because my dad had contact with her before he passed away. They were obviously very disgusted because they were engaged and had done the nasty. We now have family reunions now that my mom and her are on better terms, but it's still weird.
My best friend was toxic. Story time. Growing up, I had this best friend who we're gonna name Keisha. And since my mom died when I was a baby, Keisha's mom kind of stepped up and became a motherly figure to me. And even though I appreciated it, I don't think Keisha did. Because she would always make these rude comments like, she's not your real mom, or she doesn't love you as much as she loves me because I'm her actual daughter. And it really bothered me, but I chose to ignore it because I loved Keisha's mom like my own mom. So this one time on Mother's Day, I was at Keisha's house hanging out with her and her mom. And Keisha had this really bad attitude just because I was there. Her attitude was so bad that I didn't even want to be there. So eventually I asked if I could go home, but Keisha's mom said I didn't have to and not to let Keisha's attitude ruin our day. And when her mom said that, it really set her off. And she said something that I would never forgive her for. Keisha turns to me and opens up her disgusting mouth to say, your mother is dead. You should be spending Mother's Day at a cemetery.
The weirdest thing that ever happened to my family is my sister finding out she was dating our long-lost brother. You're probably asking, how did this happen? So when my sister was about 1, my mom was pregnant with another baby. She ended up birthing my brother, but me being 1 year old really didn't understand. Like, you really can't comprehend that you have a brother at that age. And fairly soon after this, my parents ended up getting a divorce. So my dad was originally from Germany and he decided to move back. Well, because you can't really do weekend visitations in Germany, my parents made the executive decision to split up the kids. My mom kept us and my dad got my brother. And we honestly didn't care. We didn't really know what was going on at that age. And after that, we didn't have any more contact. So fast forward 20 years later, my mom and my sister aren't really talking because of a whole separate situation. And she was going to our town's community college and met a boy. We can call him John. Well, John asked her out on a date and they ended up dating for 5 more years. Over the years, she learned stuff like his dad was from Germany, his dad passed away, and he didn't really have any contact with his mom. Follow my Insta for part 2.
So she woke up in the middle of the night to something tickling her feet, and she was really freaked out, obviously. So she jumped out of bed and turned all the lights in the lighthouse on. But when the lights came on, there was nothing there. She checked through the whole lighthouse and couldn't find anything. Nothing like that ever happened again, but she never slept well after that. She stayed in the lighthouse for like 5 more months, but eventually she found a new place to live, got a new job. She ended up moving to an entirely different state. And then one day, like a year later, she's at work, sitting at her desk, and she's going through old pictures on her phone. And she finds an album on her phone called You at Night. And she's thinking, what? I do not remember making this album. So she clicks into it and she gasps because all the pictures in the album are of her sleeping in her old bed at the lighthouse.
My mom beat up the neighbor. Story time. So I used to have this neighbor and we're gonna call her Miss Jackson. Now, Miss Jackson was super annoying, and she always found something to complain about. So my mom already didn't like her to begin with. So one day, me and my friends were playing soccer outside in my front yard, and we were having a lot of fun, until one of us kicked the ball into Miss Jackson's yard. Now, normally when something like this happened, Miss Jackson would come outside, she would yell at us, but she would give our ball back. But this time, she comes outside with a pair of scissors, walks up to the soccer ball, and starts stabbing it. And then after she pops it, she throws it back at us and goes inside. Now, I was upset and I didn't know what to do, so I just went and told my mom. And when I told my mom, she was heated. She goes over to Miss Jackson's house and starts banging on the door. And as soon as she opened the door, my mom grabbed her by the hair and started punching her. And Miss Jackson didn't even fight back. She was just apologizing the entire time.
My house has a huge glass window in the front of it that shines in moonlight at night. And a few nights after my dad saw the shadow figure, I had my friend Olivia come over to watch movies. It was around 9 o'clock at night. My dad's out at a bar. I'm over here making popcorn and I hear my friend scream. So I go over to her and she points out on the floor the shadow of somebody hanging from a noose swinging back and forth. I immediately start looking for something that could cause that shadow, but there was nothing. And every time you look at the floor, you'd see a shadow of somebody swinging back and forth on a noose. So my sister tries to calm us down and takes us down to the basement to watch a movie. Around 5 seconds later, the Alexa went off talking about a murder. So we run upstairs, we lock my door, and we just sit in there. My dad eventually got home, so we calmed down and we tried to go to bed. But around 3 hours later, my dog, who never barks, started barking at the wall. Tell me that shit ain't crazy, but as always, it gets worse.
We put our teacher in the hospital. Story time. My 6th grade class was so freaking bad, you guys. I mean, I wasn't, but the rest of the kids were horrible. Our classroom was located on the 2nd floor, so sometimes kids would throw things out the window and try to hit the kids on the ground. And normally it would just be things like pencils or crumbled up pieces of paper, nothing that could really hurt anybody, right? But one day while we were taking a test, my teacher had realized she forgot something in her car, so she left us in the classroom by ourselves. And some kids in my class thought it would be perfect to use this opportunity to cheat. So there was one kid in my class, and we're gonna name him Chris, but he decided to be a lookout, so he stood near the window to keep an eye out for the teacher. Well, when he saw her coming, the rest of the kids weren't done cheating yet, so they told him to cause a distraction. So he runs over to his desk, grabs the biggest textbook he can find, and throws it out the window at the teacher. The book hits her in the face, and it busted her bottom lip open. It was so bad that the school had to send her to the hospital.
Top 5. Okay, so around 2 summers ago, me and my sister were just chilling in our room watching YouTube. My dad was in his room watching TV. And me and my sister haven't left our room in maybe 2 hours. We were about to go to bed. And then my dad just starts calling our name. He's like, Ashley, Kayla, get over here. I'm like, bro, what? So we go into his room and he's like, which one of you just went into the kitchen? Me and my sister look at each other. We're like, none of us went in the kitchen. And he looks at us. He goes, yeah, one of you went into the kitchen. I know you did. And me and my sister look at each other and we're like, we have been in our rooms the whole time. So my dad grabs his gun and he looks around the house. There's nobody there. So I'm like, yo, what did you see? What did you see? And he was like, I saw a tall black figure walk into the kitchen. Kind of like what I saw in my mirror. So I go back to my room, I shut my door, and I try to go to bed. Around 11 o'clock, everybody in my house got woken up to a huge shatter from downstairs. I got up, my heart was in my stomach because I thought someone broke in because it sounded like a window breaking. My dad grabs his gun and we all go downstairs. And my lizard's 20-pound cage was on the floor broken.
I called the cops on my mom. Story time. When I was younger, about 7 or 8, I had a huge obsession with soda. Do you guys call it soda or pop? I say soda because that's definitely the correct way to say it. So one day in the morning when I woke up for breakfast, there was nothing to drink except for my mom spanked my bully. Story time. When I was in 3rd grade, I used to hate going to the bus stop because there was a boy there who would bully me. And it got so bad that some days I would go home crying. I felt like I couldn't do anything because he was much older than I was. So of course I told my mom and she called the school and they did nothing about it. So then my mom somehow found out who his parents were and she went to go talk to them. And all they said about it was boys will be boys, there's really nothing we can do about it. And then that's when my mom was like, if y'all don't handle it, I will. So the next morning she told me to go to the bus stop and if my bully bothered me to come back home and tell her. So I went to the bus stop and of course he bothered me. So I went back home, told my mom, and she immediately grabbed her belt and dragged me back to the bus stop. She walked up to that boy and was like, are you bothering my son? And the boy was like, yes I am. What are you gonna do about it, grandma? My mom grabbed that boy by his shirt, turned him around and started spanking him with her belt. And it was so loud. Literally got his cheeks clapped.